Let's take you live now to Pretoria, where that announcement was made, and to our reporter, Ntokozo Kumalo. And I believe you're standing by with the Statistician General.
I am indeed, Michelle. Good afternoon. Big news that we heard this afternoon when it comes to unemployment for those 3 months. And I do have Statistician General Risenga Maluleke here with us. And I'd like to start by that working age population that you really touched on before delivering that data. More people entering that working age population. Just remind our viewers when it comes to the overall population, because we've had other numbers given in terms of the state of unemployment, but just make that differentiation between the overall population and working age population.
Ntokozo, let us start by the entire population within the borders of the Republic of South Africa in terms of our mid-year population estimates, which came after we released the census results. That is sitting at 63 million. Out of the 63 million, about 40 million are in the working age. So let us start by saying 63 million. You are talking about children 0 to 14 years, and you're talking about those that are 65 years and older. You include them into the entire population. But when you come to the working age, you exclude the children. 0 to 14 years are excluded, and the 65 years and above are excluded. So we come to about 40 million. Out of the 40 million, that is the working age. Then we talk about the labor force. The labor force are people who are either employed or actively looking for employment and are not employed. That comes to about 25 million. So that is why when we take the 8.2 million people who are unemployed, actively looking for employment, we divide it by 25 million. We come to 32.9% as our unemployment rate. That is the headline. We call it the narrow definition in line with the International Labour Organization guidelines. Having said so, when you take the 8.2 million people who are actively looking for employment, and then you have another 3.5 million people who said they were discouraged work seekers. And again, there are those who didn't look for employment, not because they were discouraged, but for any other reason. We have 1 million of those. We come to 12.7 million people. That is the expanded unemployment rate of 43.1%. But all this, we do it from the ages 15 to 64. So every calculation occurs within those 40 million.
Within that working age group. Now, in South Africa, the formal sector has been the driver of job creations traditionally. We saw the informal sector create about 17,000 jobs. And the informal sector in SMME is very important in terms of driving employment in the country. Could you give us a little bit more detail of what we saw happening in the informal sector for it to create those jobs in the first 3 months of the year?
The informal sector fluctuates a lot. So you will see that come festive times, it actually increases a bit in terms of its share of employment. And again, in the beginning of the year, that is the first 3 months of the year, you tend to see people who are still holding on to their stock. They want to make sure that it's dispatched before your winter seasons and before some of the stock perishes, if it's perishable stock. And indeed, as people come back to the major urban centers, the informal sector is actually up and going. But one of the things we should understand is that the formal sector accounts for about 11.4 million people of our 16.8 million. So that is the largest. It is followed by the informal sector at 3.3 million. So its share, while it has pumped in about 17,000 jobs, it's not actually very high compared to the formal sector. And when you look at private households, they lost about 7,000 jobs. They returned back to 1.1 million people. Agriculture is the one that increased a bit. agriculture tends to be about 890,000, 900,000, but it's gone up to 930,000 jobs. But they will not, both agriculture, maybe informal sector, agriculture, as well as the private households, will never trump the formal sector in terms of the share of employment.
And of course, we did see 4 industries being the ones that were able to create jobs over that quarter. Talk us through something that you don't, get moved by the numbers. I know that very well. But you did highlight that in the 7.5 years that you were here, there is a particular point of data that you saw that you haven't seen when it comes to young people not being in education, not being in training. What is happening there? Because youth, of course, remain the most vulnerable in the labor market.
Let us start off by saying commentators like yourself, Ntokozo, and members of the public can talk about concerning issues out there with labor market statistics. But we at StatSA, and particularly the Statistician General, we can't raise concerning issues or less concerning. Our responsibility is to make numbers available. And that is because if we start attaching emotions, we will start hiding numbers. And once we hide numbers that concern us, we'll have lost our independence. And we can't do that. The nation has to know all the time. Now, there are 2 issues that I have seen, and not only in my 7.5 years as Statistician General, but in my entire career at StatSA, spanning for almost 30 years, I haven't seen 2 things. One is the number of those who were not in the economically active category. Those are people who didn't look for employment, not because they were discouraged, but they had other reasons and said, if employment came, we would have taken it. They have always been about 700, 800,000, but this time they have hit a 1 million mark. So that is the first issue. And if you look at that, you can look at the new entrants that are coming. The new entrants that have come in the labor markets in this first quarter, about 3,847, and about 80.3% of those are young people. Now, when you look at that, obviously there are a lot of young people who have come out of matric and who had aspired to go and study, but when they could not find opportunities, they started looking for employment, and in some cases they didn't find employment. So the second issue that I have seen, which I wouldn't say surprises me because I have to make numbers available, is that out of the 10.3 million young people aged 15 to 24 years in South Africa, 3.8 million of those are not in employment, education, or training, retaining a net rate of 37.1%. We have never hit that mark. We have always been about 3.3 million, about 3.5 million around there. We did reach 3.6 million, but now when you start looking at 3.8 million, you're headed to about 4 million of those. Now, but young people have been vulnerable to labor markets because when you look at them in the age cohorts, 15 to 34 years, their unemployment rate is sitting at 46.1%. When you break them down into 15 to 24 years for starters, you have an unemployment rate of about 64.1%. And when you look at those aged 25 to 34, their unemployment rate is 40.4%. So young people are vulnerable to labor markets. It's even much more challenging for them when they are female. As we see generally, females are vulnerable to labor markets, but particularly young females.
And now we can't, of course, compare Gauteng and Western Cape, the ones that did create those job opportunities, different economic structures there in how those provinces operate. Help us understand the Northwest surpassing the Eastern Cape now when it comes to that expanded unemployment definition. What did the data point to there?
Generally, the Eastern Cape used to be the one showing the highest unemployment in official terms, that is the narrow definition, as well as the expanded definition. But what we are seeing now, when I talk about the Eastern Cape, I'm talking about for more than a decade. But in the last 18 months, to 2 years, we have seen the Northwest sometimes overtaking the Eastern Cape. And in this quarter particularly, the Northwest has the highest unemployment rate in terms of official as well as expanded. But what is happening there is because of the mining industry. So many people leave their homes and go to the Northwest to look for employment in the mines. And of course, when they don't get employment, then we count them in the unemployment numbers. That is why we are seeing an increase. And some of them, when they've looked for employment based on whatever their resources are, they still get discouraged. So when the biggest driver of the expanded unemployment rate is the discouraged work seekers.
Well, thank you so much for those insights. As always, of course, Risenga Maluleke is the Statistician General here at Stats South Africa, Michelle, and a lot of data in this print that really we need to dig a little bit deeper in to understand exactly what is happening with South Africans that are looking for employment. The concerning one there, of course, being young people who are not in education or in any form of training, and also an increasing number of them being discouraged to look for work, Michelle. So a lot of data that we still need to comb through to thoroughly understand what is happening on the ground when it comes to joblessness in South Africa.